Tyler slammed the remote onto the table, the sharp crack cutting through the room. "We're done carrying dead weight," he said. "Right now." The screen behind him changed, and my name, Kira Miles, Director of Systems Operations, filled it. Centered, highlighted, unmistakable. He let it sit there like evidence. Tyler Grant, the company's new Chief Operating Officer, didn't look at me at first. He looked at the audience, the way men do when they expect agreement. "Some roles made sense years ago," he continued, "but the company has outgrown them." Then he finally turned toward me. "You've outlived your usefulness." The word you landed harder than the rest. This wasn't feedback, it was theater. He began pacing, energized now. Legacy processes, legacy thinking, people who confuse seniority with value. A faint smile crossed his face. "We can't afford that anymore." I stayed where I was. Back straight, hands still. The humiliation pressed in. Hot and slow. But I didn't give him the reaction he was fishing for. I'd learned long ago that men like Tyler mistook emotion for weakness and silence for surrender. He was wrong on both counts. "For clarity," he said, tapping the screen, "your position is terminated effective immediately. Clean. Efficient." He spoke as if erasing a function, not a person. I had spent 18 years making sure this company didn't collapse under its own ambition. I designed the systems everyone relied on, but no one wanted to understand. When failures crept in quietly, I caught them. When disasters didn't happen, no one noticed why. Reliability rarely earns applause. Tyler had been here 9 months, long enough to memorize the language of disruption, long enough to believe that subtraction was leadership. To him, experience wasn't an asset, it was friction. Another slide appeared. My department, redrawn without me, responsibilities reassigned. A younger manager leaned forward, already rehearsing confidence. Tyler nodded, satisfied. "This," he said, closing his laptop, "is what progress looks like." I didn't speak. I didn't move. I let the insult sit exactly where he threw it. Then a voice cut through the room. Calm and immovable. "Stop." The effect was immediate. Arthur Whitmore, the founder of the company. The man whose name still sat on the original charter stood near the back, cane in hand, eyes locked on Tyler Grant. "Do you have any idea," he asked evenly, "who you just tried to erase if this moment hit a little too close to home? Take a breath with me for a second. Wherever you're listening from, I hope you're taking care of yourself. Drink some warm water today. It helps more than we admit. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from, and if stories like this matter to you. Consider subscribing so you don't miss what comes next." Arthur Whitmore didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to, when he spoke. The room leaned toward him without realizing it. "Apologize," he said to Tyler Grant. "Not explain. Not clarify. Apologize." Tyler's jaw tightened. For a brief second, I saw calculation flicker behind his eyes, the kind that measures cost against pride. He forced a smile that never reached his face and turned toward me. "If my comments earlier were misunderstood," he began, "then I regret the phrasing." Arthur cut him off with a lift of his hand. "No," he said calmly. "You regret saying them." "Say that?" The silence that followed felt heavy, almost ceremonial. Tyler swallowed. "I'm sorry," he said at last. Each word dragged out. "For calling you a liability in public." It wasn't gracious, it wasn't sincere, but it was loud enough for everyone to hear. Arthur didn't acknowledge the apology. Instead, he turned to the room. "Since memories seem short," he said, resting both hands on his cane, "let me remind you who Kira Miles is." He spoke without notes, without drama. He talked about the year our systems nearly collapsed and how I rebuilt them while contracts hung by a thread. He mentioned the overnight failures that never became scandals, the departments that stayed solvent because someone noticed problems before they made headlines. No one moved, no one typed. Even Tyler stood still, arms locked at his sides. "She wasn't slowing us down." Arthur continued, She was holding us together. His eyes swept the room. If that's what you call dead weight now, then this company has lost its sense of value. For a moment, satisfaction warmed my chest. Not triumph, something smaller and sharper, being seen, publicly, after years of invisibility. It felt good, too good to trust. Arthur finally looked back at Tyler. "You will not make personnel decisions this way again," he said. "Not while my name is attached to this place." HR cleared her throat and stood. "For transparency," she said carefully. "The termination decision regarding Ms. Miles is under review. No final action will be taken until further notice." Murmurs rippled through the room. Tyler nodded once, stiffly, as if compliance were a favor he was granting. The meeting ended shortly after. People avoided my eyes as they filed out, unsure whether to congratulate me or keep their distance. I gathered my things slowly, letting the moment pass without reaching for it. Arthur waited until we were alone near the corridor. Then he leaned closer and spoke quietly. "Don't mistake this for a victory," he said. "Men like him don't forget being corrected." I met his gaze. I assumed as much. Arthur nodded. "Good, because this isn't over." The next morning, I returned to my desk with a title but no territory. My calendar was empty. My approvals were pending someone else's name. I was still employed, still visible, yet somehow removed from every decision that mattered. Being sidelined without being dismissed was its own kind of warning. People noticed. They just didn't acknowledge it. Conversations stopped when I approached. Emails came with vague phrasing and missing attachments. Meetings were rescheduled without explanation. No one was cruel. That was the point. Distance is safer than hostility. Small problems began surfacing in the systems I used to oversee. Nothing dramatic. A delayed vendor confirmation. A duplicated invoice that didn't reconcile cleanly. Minor errors. The kind executives ignore until they become patterns. I flagged them out of habit, copied my replacement out of courtesy, and received polite acknowledgments that went nowhere. Meanwhile, Tyler Grant was everywhere. His name appeared on approval chains it had never touched before. Procurement, vendor negotiations, temporary finance authorizations labeled as efficiency measures. He spoke often about streamlining oversight, about eliminating bottlenecks in decision-making. The words were familiar. The timing was not. I started paying attention again, the way I used to when something felt off but couldn't yet be proven. I watched how responsibilities shifted, how one person no longer needed a second signature, how temporary access became permanent if no one objected quickly enough. Tyler wasn't breaking rules. He was collecting them. What unsettled me most was how quiet it all was. No announcements, no resistance, just a gradual narrowing of who could see what, approve what, question what. Control rarely arrives loudly. It prefers convenience. Late one afternoon, while sorting through system notifications I still received by inertia, I noticed a request sitting untouched in the queue. It wasn't addressed to me, but my old access still allowed visibility. A vendor access elevation, marked urgent, approved digitally less than an hour earlier. I opened it. The scope made no sense. It granted editing rights over multiple supplier contracts and payment schedules. Authority usually split between operations and finance. The justification field was thin, almost careless. Process optimization, temporary coverage. At the bottom sat a familiar signature, Tyler Grant. I stared at the screen longer than necessary, letting the implications settle. This wasn't cleanup. This wasn't efficiency. This was consolidation. I closed the request without flagging it, my pulse steady, my suspicion sharp. After the apology came the blade. And it was already moving. I saved a copy. Not as proof yet, but as instinct. Because experience had taught me that quiet changes were never accidents, only rehearsals for something worse to come. At this point, do you feel something is about to happen the moment I realized no one was coming to shut my access off? I stopped waiting for permission. I wasn't reckless, I was precise. A handful of legacy dashboards still recognized my credentials, leftovers from systems I had designed years earlier. They weren't powerful anymore, but they were enough to see patterns. And patterns were all I needed. I worked early and quietly, before the building filled with noise. I didn't dig randomly. I followed habits, tracing approvals, timestamps, and small inconsistencies that most people dismissed as clerical friction. At first, nothing looked criminal. It rarely does. Then the numbers began to repeat. Invoices appeared just below review thresholds. Vendor names shifted slightly between entries. Close enough to look familiar, different enough to avoid automated flags. Payment schedules accelerated without explanation. Each change was small, defensible, forgettable. Together, they formed a shape I recognized. I cross-checked vendor records against procurement archives and found gaps where history should have been. Addresses that resolved to shared offices. Phone numbers that forwarded endlessly. Paper companies. Shells. Whoever set them up understood compliance well enough to stay invisible. That was when Tyler's urgency made sense. He wasn't simplifying operations. He was clearing space, consolidating approvals, reducing witnesses. The faster he moved control under himself, the fewer people could notice where money drifted once it left the company. What unsettled me wasn't the fraud itself. It was the timing, the access changes, the public humiliation, the way my role had been neutralized without removing me entirely. He didn't want me gone immediately. He wanted me compromised. I pulled transaction logs from the last 60 days and compared them against archived backups. One file resisted clean alignment. Its contents matched the others, but the metadata told a different story. Modified timestamps didn't match creation paths. User IDs conflicted with session records. I leaned back, breathing evenly. Metadata doesn't lie, it just waits. Someone had edited the file after approval, then tried to smooth the trail. They missed a checksum. They always do. The signature attached to the modification was familiar. Tyler Grant. I saved copies, encrypted them, and closed every window I'd opened. No alarms sounded. No one noticed. Not yet. I didn't feel anger. I felt clarity. This wasn't about efficiency or ego. It was preparation. And if Tyler needed me sidelined to finish setting his trap, then I already knew one thing for certain. I wasn't the obstacle. I was the variable he couldn't control. And knowing that, I slowed down. I watched, documented, and waited. Every quiet adjustment he made sharpened the outline of his plan. The data kept aligning. I didn't rush to confront him. Evidence works best when it finishes speaking on its own, and I intended to let it speak loudly, clearly, and without mercy. That moment was coming soon. I didn't hear about the accusation from Tyler himself. It arrived as a calendar invite, clipped and formal, titled Compliance Review, sent by HR with no explanation attached. That alone told me everything. When power feels threatened, it hides behind procedure. I walked into the glass room, already knowing the script. Tyler sat there composed, hands folded, eyes alert. He didn't greet me. He waited, confident the structure would do the work he no longer needed to do himself. It was cleaner this way, quieter, and designed to look responsible rather than personal today. HR spoke first, careful and rehearsed, outlining concerns about unauthorized access to sensitive systems. Tyler didn't interrupt. He watched me the way someone watches a door they expect to close. When they said my access was suspended pending investigation, I nodded once. There was no point arguing facts in a room that had already chosen its version. They asked for my badge, my laptop, my phone. I placed each item on the table slowly, calmly, precisely. Their politeness was deliberate, meant to suggest fairness while removing leverage without raising voices or making eye contact. I felt the pressure then, not sharp but enclosing, like walls moving inward without sound. This was the counter-strike. Tyler wasn't trying to confront me. He was trying to frame me. Accusations move faster than truth once they're documented. Still, I didn't defend myself. I had already separated emotion from preparation. Weeks earlier, I had copied logs, approvals, metadata trails, storing them outside the company's reach. Silence. Here was strategy, not weakness, not fear, but deliberate restraint shaped by experience and long memory of how systems collapse when evidence arrives too early or alone. They escorted me out politely, as if courtesy could soften removal. My desk was already half empty. Permissions revoked mid-morning. Colleagues looked through me, uncertain which version of events would survive. I carried nothing personal with me except certainty. Tyler had moved too fast, claimed too much, assumed I would scramble. Instead, I documented the timing, the access cuts, the sequence. Pressure reveals habits. Habits reveal intent. And intent leaves patterns that audits can follow even when people lie convincingly for a while longer under professional language and stage concern during moments like these. I learned about the audit days later, not from HR, not from Tyler, but from a subtle shift in behavior. Requests paused. Approvals slowed. Arthur Whitmore had activated something quietly. Without announcement. An independent review. Outside internal loyalties. Outside Tyler's control. I felt the pressure ease. Just slightly. I was suspended, isolated, accused. But I was not exposed. The counterstrike had failed. And the next move would no longer be his. It would belong to records, timestamps, and people who followed evidence without needing permission or forgiveness or fear anymore from anyone involved here. If you were me at this moment, what would you do? Leave a comment below. Arthur Whitmore didn't call me to his office. He chose a quiet cafe 2 blocks from headquarters, the kind no one noticed because it had been there forever. He arrived early, already seated, reading nothing. When I sat down, he folded his hands and looked at me as if he had been waiting much longer than that morning. "You handled it correctly," he said. No preface, no comfort, just a statement. I didn't thank him. I didn't need reassurance. I needed clarity. "They've suspended me," I said. "He's moving faster now." Arthur nodded once. "Of course he is." For a moment, I thought he would offer protection. A statement, some public correction that would stop the bleeding. Instead, he leaned back and surprised me. Let him continue. I watched his face carefully. "You want me to do nothing, I want you," he said evenly. "To keep observing, and I want him confident." He paused. "Men like Tyler don't make their real mistakes when they're challenged. They make them when they believe they've won." The words settled slowly. This wasn't retreat. It was patience with purpose. Arthur explained what he had already put in motion. An external audit, commissioned quietly, routed through channels Tyler didn't control. No announcement, no deadline. Just eyes watching where Tyler assumed no one was looking. "He'll tighten his grip," Arthur said. And when people tighten control, they start erasing. That was the hope. Fragile but real. Not rescue, but alignment. An ally who understood systems as well as people. Days passed. I stayed away, officially suspended, unofficially attentive. Tyler's behavior shifted almost immediately. Requests that had once stacked up began resolving overnight. Access trails shortened, files were touched, reopened, resaved, cleanup masquerading as diligence. Then I saw it. A vendor archive that had been quietly edited, its revision history partially wiped. The deletion was clean enough to fool a casual review, sloppy enough to offend anyone who knew where to look. A critical document had been re-uploaded rather than restored. New timestamp, old checksum, a contradiction. I felt something close to relief, not satisfaction, confirmation. Tyler thought the audit was theoretical. He believed speed would protect him. In trying to erase himself, he'd pressed too hard, left fingerprints where none had existed before. It was the kind of mistake no speech could undo. Arthur was right. He hadn't needed to shield me publicly. He needed Tyler to move unguarded. I forwarded nothing. I said nothing. I documented and waited, letting the trail grow colder and clearer at the same time. Hope, I realized, wasn't loud. It sat quietly beside discipline, trusting that truth, when allowed time, always finds the weakest seam. Don't leave, yet the next part is where everything starts to shift. I knew Tyler would strike outward once the cleanup failed. He always needed a scapegoat. The narrative shifted fast. Emails circulated blaming process errors, and unauthorized deviations traced conveniently to junior managers. A procurement analyst was escorted out. A finance lead was put on leave. Tyler stood at meetings with practiced gravity, saying, "We're correcting mistakes made without my approval," as if authority erased fingerprints. Then my name returned, carefully framed. HR forwarded a notice stating Tyler intended to pursue legal action for reputational harm. According to him, I had accessed systems improperly, leaked misinformation, and damaged executive credibility. "We'll protect the company," he said publicly. Privately, his message was sharper. "Stay quiet, or this gets ugly." The pressure tightened. Systems began failing in visible ways this time. Vendor payments stalled. Inventory data stopped syncing overnight. Teams scrambled, pointing fingers upward and sideways. Tyler demanded answers on recorded calls, his voice controlled but brittle. "Who touched this?" he asked again and again, as if repetition could rewrite logs. I watched from the margins, suspended but not blind. Each failure followed a pattern I recognized instantly. Dependencies removed, manual overrides disabled, safeguards stripped in the name of speed. Tyler had forced automation where it didn't belong, when he called it progress. I almost laughed, in a closed session with legal. He went further. "She designed this mess," he said, not bothering to lower his voice. "If it collapses, it proves my point." The room fell silent. I felt the confrontation sharpen into something personal, something reckless. That was when the old system stirred. Years ago, before dashboards and shortcuts. I had built a fallback architecture no one liked because it required understanding. Tyler had dismissed it once as museum tech. He'd ordered it sidelined, assuming it was obsolete. It wasn't. As failures cascaded, the fallback triggered quietly, rerouting processes he'd forgotten existed. It didn't fix everything. It stabilized just enough to expose where his changes had broken continuity. The logs were unforgiving. The contrast was clear. Tyler demanded a shutdown. "Kill the legacy layer," he snapped. They couldn't. No one else knew how. For the first time, he wasn't fighting me. He was fighting a system that remembered who built it. It was the kind of confrontation Tyler never planned for, because it couldn't be silenced with threats or reframed by lawyers. Every alert, every failure report, every recovery pointed in the same direction. Control without understanding had finally met its limit, and everyone could see it. And for the first time, the room stopped blaming shadows and started looking directly at the man who claimed progress while breaking everything beneath him. That was the moment tension became irreversible for him. The boardroom felt different before anyone spoke. Not tense, settled. The auditors took their seats, folders aligned, screens ready, voices steady. When the lead auditor began, there was no preamble, no drama, just facts. They walked the timeline cleanly. Vendor accounts created, edited, paid, and retired. Amounts shaved just under review thresholds. Invoices approved minutes apart. A map of money that looked accidental until it didn't. Each slide tightened the picture, each number narrowing the margin for denial. My name appeared briefly, then disappeared again. The trail didn't need me. It led forward, not backward. Shell vendors shared addresses, phone numbers looped, digital signatures repeated with mathematical indifference. Tyler Grant's signature sat where oversight should have been. Someone asked if it could be coincidence. The auditor answered without lifting his eyes. Coincidence doesn't balance this neatly. Murmurs spread and died. The room was listening now. Charts shifted to logs. Logs to metadata, a single file, altered after approval, carried conflicting timestamps and a mismatched checksum. The explanation failed before it was offered. The system remembered what people tried to forget. Tyler leaned forward, jaw tight. "This is a misinterpretation," he said. "Access was consolidated for efficiency." He glanced at me, then away. "Anyone could have exploited it." The auditor nodded once. "We considered that." Another screen appeared, showing access paths converging on one account. One device. One pattern of late-night edits. The edits originated from your credentials, Mr. Grant. Silence settled. Not shocked, but complete. I felt a small, contained satisfaction, not joy, not triumph. Recognition. Justice beginning to take shape without asking for applause. Arthur Whitmore sat at the end of the table, hands folded, saying nothing. He didn't need to. The evidence spoke with the patience of someone who had been allowed time. When questions turned toward him, he only said, "Continue." The auditors did. They froze accounts. They flagged transfers. They outlined next steps with the calm of people used to endings. Tyler's certainty thinned. His eyes searched for allies that didn't answer. That was when it landed on him. Not the fraud, the timeline. Dates stretching back farther than he expected. Reviews scheduled before my suspension. Monitoring triggered before his cleanup began. He looked at Arthur, finally understanding. Arthur met his gaze. "Unreadable." "You knew," Tyler said quietly. Arthur replied just as quietly. I watched. The meeting adjourned without ceremony. No speeches, no victory laps. As we stood, I felt the balance shift. Justice hadn't exploded. It had emerged, steady and undeniable. And it was only beginning. I stayed quiet, letting the weight settle, knowing this wasn't an ending but a threshold where systems corrected themselves, roles clarified, and patience finally paid off without spectacle. Because truth doesn't rush. It accumulates, waits, and then arrives intact, leaving no room for spin, excuses, or borrowed authority to stand once the record is complete and unchallenged by fear or noise anymore. I expected anger to arrive when Tyler was escorted out. It didn't. What came instead was space. The decision moved faster than rumor. His access was revoked, his office sealed, and by afternoon, his file had already been transferred to external counsel. No announcement framed it as tragedy or lesson. It was handled the way real consequences usually are, efficiently, without emotion, and without appeal. Watching that door close felt less like victory and more like release. The board turned to me next. An offer, carefully worded, to return to my previous role. Same title, same responsibilities. A restoration, they called it. I listened without interrupting, already knowing my answer. Going back would mean pretending nothing had been revealed. That power had merely misfired instead of exposing itself. "I won't," I said. Calm. Certain. That position no longer makes sense. No one argued. They had expected gratitude. Instead, they recalculated. Arthur Whitmore spoke after a pause. "Then don't return to it," he said. "Redefine it." He described a new mandate oversight without operational dependency. Ethics tied directly to systems. Reporting to the board. Insulated from executive pressure. Authority designed not to manage people, but to prevent quiet abuse before it metastasized. I accepted without hesitation. Not because it felt like promotion, but because it felt final. Tyler couldn't sidestep it. No one could. The role existed precisely because of what he had tried to do. Later, as I walked through the building, conversations resumed normally, not hushed, not careful, just ordinary again. That was the clearest sign the damage had stopped spreading. I passed Tyler's empty office without looking in. Whatever remained there was no longer my concern. Retaliation had never been my goal. Closure was. I hadn't won by outmaneuvering him publicly or humiliating him in return. I had waited, documented, and allowed systems to respond the way they were designed to. The power shift was quiet but permanent. Decisions would no longer hinge on charisma or speed alone. There would be structure where shortcuts once lived, visibility where shadows had been useful. As I left that evening, I realized something unexpected. I didn't feel lighter because Tyler was gone. I felt lighter because I no longer needed to watch my back. The door hadn't just closed on him, it had locked behind me, securing ground I would never have to defend the same way again. From that point forward, my authority wasn't symbolic. It was procedural, documented, and enforced. Decisions now left traces. Exceptions required witnesses. Silence stopped being a weapon. The company didn't change overnight, but it corrected its posture, choosing endurance over theatrics, accountability over impulse, and systems that protected people instead of exploiting them fully. I packed my things slowly, not because there was much left, but because there was no reason to rush. The office looked the same as it always had. Screens humming, lights steady, systems running without ceremony. I didn't feel the urge to look back for validation or linger for closure. Those things had already happened quietly, where they mattered. People watched me leave without knowing what expression to choose. There was no applause, no awkward sympathy, just normalcy returning to its place. That felt right. Justice, I had learned, rarely announces itself. It settles in. Arthur Whitmore walked with me part of the way, his pace unhurried. Near the elevator, he stopped and looked around as if confirming something only he could see. Then he said it, simply, without emphasis. "This company exists," he said, "because of the people who were once called a burden." I nodded. It wasn't a compliment, it was a correction. We didn't talk about Tyler. There was nothing left to say about him. His absence had already done more explaining than his presence ever had. The systems were stable. The oversight was in place. The trail he tried to erase had become policy. When I stepped outside, the air felt lighter, not triumphant, just clear. I wasn't leaving behind a battlefield. I was leaving behind a finished chapter. The work ahead would be quieter, slower, and difficult in the ways that actually mattered. As I walked away, I understood something that would have sounded hollow weeks earlier. I hadn't been protected because I was indispensable. I had been proven necessary because the structure finally recognized endurance without spectacle. The systems were still running, not because of Tyler Grant, but because of the people he tried to remove, whose work continued long after the noise faded. Living through this taught me something simple and uncomfortable. Real value is quiet, and it's often mistaken for weakness until the moment it's gone. I didn't win by shouting, rushing, or humiliating anyone back. I survived by staying clear-headed, by trusting evidence, and by respecting myself when others didn't. That's not just strategy, it's dignity. If you've ever been underestimated, pushed aside, or labeled unfairly, I'd really like to hear your story. Where are you listening from right now? Share it in the comments. And if this resonated, a like, a share, or a quiet subscription helps more than you know, so these stories can keep finding the people who need them.